So, now, sort of just an overview of the sort of implications of the course. I'm assuming we're in this dangerous understanding of being called technicity, and the interesting question is what can we do about it? That whether you call it technicity or any other thing, then people think that, or nihilism, there does seem to be a kind of malaise in the culture right now, and it seems that something has gone wrong, or at least lots of people think that, from Weber and Nietzsche and Foucault and Heidegger, to name just a few. And so the question is, what are we supposed to do about it? What cultural resources do we have for getting free of the way that practices work, those practices that produce us and everything else as resources that should be as flexible and as optimized as possible? Heidegger doesn't think that we've lost something. I mean, I'll come back in a minute to the various ways that people can think about the problem. But there are people who think that we've lost something that once made life worth living, and that it's very serious that it's gone. And some people think that we can just go back to it. So the first thing is just to see that Heidegger's not a romantic nostalgic that thinks that things were great once. He does think that, pretty good anyway, not perfect, but pretty good once in Greece and pretty good once in the Black Forest. But he's quite clear that we can't go back to that. And so he's very different. Don't let people call him a romantic and a nostalgic as they do. Romantic people like Rousseau, who'd like to return to some kind of perfectly innocent nature, and Wordsworth, who's sort of a kind of like, could be read like a deep ecologist who thinks that there is something special about nature and we've been cut off from nature, but we should get back in touch with nature. There are people, a little before your time, Robert Bellah, who retired recently, who wants to get back to his earlier Christianity when the Christian words really meant something to people. And I just read a book recently by a man named Richard Sennett called The Corrosion of Character, who obviously is in the subject-object stage and wishes that we were still subjects that had long-range life plans and character and could develop more and more into a strong identity and know who we were and pass this on, and our children would know who we were and would want to be like us and all that. Sennett sees that we're losing that, and he regrets it. And there are people who admire the Amish, who think that it's great that they can live in this way without technology, and that it would be great if we all could. This was a sort of a movement of hippies to go to communes where they would live in this minimally technological way. Well, Heidegger's not like any of that. He thinks that what the Greeks had and the peasants had is something that's lost forever and can't be recovered. That is, insofar as there was a certain content to the way their life was, they had certain gods and they had certain practices and so forth. That's just gone. You know that from the from poetry, language, and thought, for instance. No. Wait a minute. I don't understand why I put this here. He says. Our reference to the Black Forest farm in no way means that we should or could go back to building such houses on page 160. I'm just picking up places where it's clear that he's not being nostalgic. And another place is 165. Somehow, I don't know how I got my pages all mixed up. I really want Okay, well, I'll find another. On 41, he talks about how the Greek world is perished, and that's that. And world perishing can never be undone, he says on 41, at the top of the page. World withdrawal and world decay can never be undone. So that's just all ways of saying we can't go back to them. They're over. The longest one is not in the assignment, but I read it once before on page 91, where he says, our era is defined by the God's failure to arrive, by default of God. And then he says that doesn't mean that people still don't go to churches. It means that no God any longer gathers men and things unto himself visibly and univocally, and by such gathering disposes the world's history and man's sojourn in it. Not only have the gods and the God fled, but the divine radiance has become extinguished in the world's history. So the gods are gone and the sacred is extinguished, and we can't get it back. But, and now comes the surprising thing, but clearly Heidegger's not nostalgic about it, not even thinking that this is in a way a great loss, oddly enough, though it sounds pretty bad the way he describes it. But on page 48 of the Turning, he says, remember, middle of the page, all attempts to reckon existing reality in terms of decline and loss are merely technological behavior. So that's just not even the right way to understand what's going on, is to think that there was something terrific once which is gone and we've lost it. We can't get back to it. Thinking we can get back to it is really bad news. Thinking that, for Heidegger, just wrong-headed, but thinking that there's something lost that we should get back to, that there's some kind of decline. He's oddly enough saying that's not the right way to think about it either. Now that's a clue that there's something really special going on in Heidegger that we've got to get clear about. That's really what I want to talk about. And explain why he would say such a thing, that you can't even think that we've lost something. He says the gods are extinguished, the peasants have TV on their houses and have lost, seeming have no more nearness. But boy, that looks like decline and loss. But it's not. Well, it is and it isn't. And that's what we have to get clear about. Okay, so if we're not going to be romantic and nostalgic, there seem to be three kinds of reaction to the fact that there's something missing or something wrong, there's something distressing in the modern world, according to a lot of people. I've got three versions of the non-romantic, non-nostalgic reaction to what's going on, none of which are the Heidegger version of this course. There is early Heidegger here. Anyway, there is something like the bad news version, I'd call it. For that, you get Weber. And Weber is famous for saying that, this was Max Weber. You may not have heard of him, although he's a famous sociologist. And I use his phrase, he talks about the disenchantment of the world. He says, there are no longer any mysterious, incalculable forces that come into play, but rather one can, in principle, master all things by calculation. This means that the world is disenchanted. And the kind of disenchantment he has in mind is something you can't get back, because it's like innocence. Once you've lost it, there's no way to recover it. Or you could say it's like becoming rational and reflective. You can't stop anymore. You could become irrational and crazy, I suppose, but you can't go back to sort of primitive, pre-rational thinking once you've developed rational thinking. Or it's like being a child and then growing up. When you've grown up, you can't think like a child anymore. So for Weber, he's my example of something that's really lost. He is thinking it in terms of loss and no return. Okay, the next is, and that's more fun, the good news version. Yes, we've lost something, but it really wasn't so good anyway, and we'll find something else worth cultivating in its place just because we've lost it. Well, the example I used of sort of going from childhood to being a grown-up is the way it looks to Habermas. Yeah, we become rational and reflective, all right. Our world isn't intended anymore. We're now grown up and mature thanks to the Enlightenment. It's true that the culture doesn't give us any sort of content resources anymore, any understanding of the holy or of the good or of God or even of meaningful differences. As Habermas says, we've got no resources left in our culture that can save us, or he wouldn't put it that way, but that will help us. But that's all right. that forces us to act on rational principles. And we should have been acting on rational principles all along. We shouldn't have been involved in this kind of just relying on whatever the ethics of the culture happen to be and the gods happen to be. We should be autonomous, rational, mature, and now we have to be. So it's a loss and good riddance. Now, there's the absolute opposite of Habermas, who also thinks it's a loss and good riddance. Kierkegaard. It's as if I was starting with the first lecture of the Kierkegaard course because I was going to read one passage from Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard thinks, and he thought it earlier than any of them, earlier than Nietzsche or Weber, who's influenced by Nietzsche, certainly earlier than Habermas, who's still around. But he thought that something which he called reflection had undermined all commitment and all the sacred that was once in the world. He says, and it's a great quote, from the present age. And so when the generation, that was his generation, 1850, this is going to turn out to be good news, but it doesn't sound like good. And so when the generation which itself desired to level and to be emancipated, to destroy authority, and at the same time itself, has through its skepticism, started the hopeless forest fire of abstraction. When as a result of leveling meaningful differences, is what he's talking about, with this skepticism, the generation has rid itself of the individual and of everything concrete and put in its place humanity and the numerical equality of man and man. When the generation has for a moment delighted in this unlimited panorama of abstract infinity, unrelieved by even the smallest eminence, undisturbed by even the slightest interest, a sea, a desert, then the time has come for work to begin, for every individual must work for himself, each for himself. No longer can the individual turn to the great for help when he grows confused. There'll be no charismatic leaders. That is past. He is either lost in the dizziness of unending abstraction or saved forever in the reality of religion. Well, for Kierkegaard, what happens is when all the meaning is drained out of the world by rationality and abstraction, then it's still possible for individuals to have unconditional commitments to other individuals. And they have this in a way, as he would put it, before God, because in a way that I can't explain, God is what makes unconditional commitments possible. But that's all that people ever really needed, and that is the highest thing that people can do. So it's good news now that this illusion of what he calls sometimes mediation, which is all this concrete cultural support that people once had, in all this way that the holy and the sacred was all over the place, the way it once was. Thank goodness all that's gone, and people now have to face up to what it is to be an individual. It's just the opposite of Habermas, because Habermas thinks, and when you do face up, then you get to be purely rational. And what he likes about the present age is what he calls the public sphere, where all these rational talking heads talk to each other about how to run the world. And what Kierkegaard thinks is that that's a disaster. He thinks that the public sphere, or the public, or the press, as he calls it, have produced this leveling of everything. But it's all right because then we have to get out of that. Stop being detached, rational talking heads, and get to be totally concrete, committed individuals. Okay, Nietzsche comes in there and he says, yes, God is dead, and boy, is that good news. The gay science is just full of these wonderful quotes. I forgot to bring one in that I never thought of bringing one in, where now a new day dawns, now we're free to go out on the ocean and sail anywhere. Finally, at last, we are able to be the adventurers that we always should have been. So God, supersensualists are dead and good riddance. Now we can invent ourselves from scratch. We can outgrow our past. We can convalesce from 2,000 years of bad understandings of things, and we'll get rid of all meaning. We'll get rid of all need for meaning, and life will be a constant overcoming. That's the moral of the gay science. So there you've got sort of two opposed views. Sort of the Weber view, something has been lost and that's terrible, but there's nothing we can do about it. And the all these optimistic people who say, yes, something has been lost, but that's great. Now we can finally be what we always should have been. Now there's a third possibility, which is in being in time, which is sort of a compromise between these two in a certain way. We can save something from the past and transform it in such a way that it really fits the need of the present and enables us to cope with the problems of the present generation. That is, Heidegger says, we need to take up a hero or a practice from the past, which is part of our heritage, but is marginal now or unappreciated, and adapt it to the present. That is, we make what Heidegger calls a reciprocal rejoinder to the heritage that's in the cultural practice. Now, I think he's on the right track there, he would say later. But that's too ontic. It's too much in terms of picking up some particular marginal practices, some particular hero from the past. There's something more interesting going on for later Heidegger than that. Okay, now, the way middle Heidegger, sorry, I should have said, when I say later Heidegger, I sometimes mean everything after being in time. And I sometimes mean middle Heidegger, which is the age of the world picture. So, no, sorry, the origin of the work of art, Heidegger, where there's one God, one saving statesman, one work of art. There's one truth that establishes itself at a time in the West, and it's total. Really, I want to call that middle Heidegger. And then there's really late Heidegger, which is the thinking Heidegger. If you, for shorthand, you can think of middle Heidegger as monotheistic. There's got to be one being in the one clearly that gives us the one set of meaningful differences that makes life worth living. And late Heidegger is polytheistic Heidegger. There's going to be a lot of gods or things singing or worlds, and we don't have to hope or expect, or maybe we don't even want one. Well, so now, but what's most interesting is what's going on in middle Heidegger, which is interesting, sort of independent of whether it's totalizing or not. The totalizing is not the crucial question, but I have to explain that. So what does Heidegger think? So why does Heidegger think we miss something important? We miss everything important if we think in terms of decline and loss. And the answer is, and this is the heart of what I want to say. This is really this sort of came to me as a flash, and I'm just expanding it. But the flash is the following, that if you think we've lost something, then you don't see. And then you begin to worry about what the cultural content is that we've lost, and whether we can retrieve it, or whether if we can't retrieve it, that's good news or bad news. That's what I've been talking about. But the basic wrong-headedness of all that is we haven't lost anything at all. And the interesting idea that Heidegger has, of course, is that the clearing is still being sent, that we are still being receivers and preservers of it, and that therefore things are showing up for us as something, and that this is amazing and mysterious and something that science can never account for and rationality can never account for, and it's only in the space opened up by this that you could even have science and rationality. The whole moral of the course. That is, there is a saving power that has authority and will make our lives worth living because we're disclosers, and our job is to be the place where various worlds or various styles in the West happen. And that's supposed to be, and that's not something, you see, that's lost. That's not, that's pretty mysterious. And that's a kind of enchantment in the sense that it's something going on that we can't calculate, can't be rational about, can't objectify. But it's not something that's behind us. It's something that's happening now. So the new question for Heidegger isn't whether we've lost anything, but whether we've lost touch with it. That's how he switches it all around. So there's nothing lost that's important. we're still disclosers, and disclosing is still going on. But there is something important nonetheless that's been lost, namely our understanding of it. And that's very dangerous because we could lose touch with it completely. Then we'd be resources, and then there wouldn't be any disclosing going on or any sending of understandings of being. And now a subtler point, which you're used to as a kind of review. Now, the culture was never fully in touch with its role, with our role as disclosure. That's what we found out in Basic Questions. This is all Basic Questions talk, that we had something pretty amazing going on once, but we could have something even more amazing going on in the future. And Heidegger's preparing the way. Because though they had some sense of their job as preservers in 5th century BC Greece, because they understood that poiesis, which is nurturing and cultivating, is what's crucial about what's going on. It was their understanding of being, and they had some feel for the clearing. But as you know, they didn't interrogate the clearing. They didn't think about it. They didn't know there was a clearing, and they didn't know that their job was to be the preservers and nurturers of clearing. And because they never were fully in touch with it, they lost it. Namely, that it was possible then for Plato and more clearly Aristotle and finally everybody to lose it as we got. That is, even though there was a clearing and there was worlding and there was what he'll later call appropriation going on, three things happened, as you know. The clearing was overlooked because it withdraws. And then metaphysics came along and denied it in Plato by having a correspondence theory of truth instead of an aletheia, unconcealedness understanding of truth. And now it's not only, the clearing is not only concealed, or the truth is not only concealed, but it's concealed that it's concealed. We've even forgotten that we've forgotten. Those are Heidegger's stories. But none of them are stories about any thing that's lost. The thing is the right word, any activity that's lost, any event, I don't even know how to describe it. That all that's important is going on anyway. But something lost, namely, we are out of touch with it. As soon as we get back in touch with it, which is, since it's already happening anyway, we will belong to it as we have belonged to it ever since the beginning. But we won't really belong to it until we are in touch with it and it pervades the way we live. So what can we say about that? Well, things like this. If you put it in terms of appropriation, arrivedness, then you say that things are gathering because that's how practices work, but we can help nurture gathering of things and bringing things out into their own and nearness. I mean, we can't by our own willpower reverse the practices that tend to get out of touch with gathering and don't bring things out into their own. But when we find any practices that do, we can help them, support them, repeat them as much as we can. And we've always got access to things singing in poetic language to remind us of this. Language is saying all the time, even now, all we need to do is listen. So the slogan, as somebody gave it to me, I think it may have been B, the slogan for this is, we got it, but we don't get it. That's the slogan. Okay. That's the Heidegger take on the current scene. So, and if dwelling means to be a preserver and discloser, then in a certain way human beings are always dwelling, and yet they have to learn to dwell. What's the meaning of that? And that keeps coming up. I could have asked, well, how can that be? That we're dwelling all the time and that we have to learn to dwell. It's this business again of something's going on all the time. Appropriating, disclosing, world is worlding, and we're the place where it's happening. And in that sense, we're dwelling. However, we are out of touch with it. And to be really dwelling, we've got to learn to live in terms of that, not live in such a way as to deny it, which is what we do when we try to make everything into flexible resources, or when we think that we've got the right at metaphysics, whatever it is, which is the correct answer to reality. So I was going to read, we still have time to do this. So on 213, he says, well, again, we don't read this, but he says, every man at all times, let's see, but how is man, and this means every man at all times, supposed to dwell poetically? So I think that means that human beings always, everywhere, at all times, dwell. But they don't dwell poetically is another way to put it, because to dwell poetically, I think, is to be then in touch with the fact that you dwell. If we did, well, I have one quote 161. I think that's been something we read. Yes, in building dwelling thinking. So he says, the end of the building dwelling thinking, the real dwelling plight lies in this, that mortals ever search anew for the nature of dwelling, that they must ever learn to dwell. What if man's homelessness consisted in this, that man still does not even think of the real plight of dwelling as the plight? And now comes the interesting special Heidegger thing. Yet as soon as man gives to his homelessness, it is misery no longer. Because that is, as soon as he gets in touch with the fact that he's not dwelling, as soon as he gets in touch with the fact that he's not in touch with that he's called to be a dweller, he's back in touch with it. And then he's all right. He's not homeless anymore. And another important thesis from the question of being, was that what was? No, not the question of being. What's the thing we read at the beginning, the book? No. The basic question. I think I called it the question of being once earlier on and confused people. If somebody could have stopped me. Yeah, the basic questions. Back to this again. If we do get back in touch with it, of course, and this is just another side of what I've been saying, we're better off than the Greeks. So there'd be no need to be nostalgic for a return to anything, and no sense that we've irrevocably lost anything important. We've lost something ontic, namely the content of the culture. That's gone. That culture's content is gone. The content of the culture in the Black Forest is gone. But there's no reason to be nostalgic about that, because if we got in touch with what's really important about human beings, namely that they're the place where this disclosing happens and preserving, we'd be better off than the Greeks were, who never were fully in touch with it. So that only leaves me one sort of problem with this middle Heidegger, which is I've never been able to say, and I don't know if anybody has, if they have in their papers, be sure and show me their papers, or if you know any book, show me their book, just exactly what concretely this comes to when you got in touch with it and you dwell and so forth. Just what do you do? It's sort of clear what you don't do. You don't press on with technology furiously, thinking that if anything that isn't efficient is deficient, and that's a new slogan, and should be made efficient. And you don't curse technology as the work of the devil, as if it had taken away something from human beings that was so valuable that it's a disaster that they've lost it. That's just more technology, remember? So that's what you do. But that seems to me not very helpful. And I feel that there ought to be a lot more to say about what you positively do when you're in touch and when you're preserving. And I haven't said it. And I'm sorry I haven't said it, but it seems to me Heidegger hasn't said it. And so I don't know what to say. Yeah.
Isn't asking what you're doing for that technologically?
Well, you're good. If it's asking sort of, yes, if it's asking what you sort of willfully can do, that is just by yourself and as a kind of autonomous subject, yes. But Heidegger is certainly not saying that you just have to sit back and be totally passive. It's not that either. You have to call it's this middle thing between action and passion or suffering or passivity. It's cultivating or nurturing. What you're supposed to be doing is preserving and nurturing those activities and those moments somehow when people are in touch, or when the culture is in touch, or when you're in touch with this disclosing. That's what you should do. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's not willful to try to help and preserve the humble thing, well, to preserve, but then it gets rather empty again. It's to preserve whatever happens when you're preserving this total understanding. See, I don't think this is going to get us anywhere. I'm not a middle Heidegger fan, finally, though I think it's a marvelous picture. And to me, I think it's probably even true of what was happening from 500 BC right through Nietzsche, the history of total understandings of being in the West. But it doesn't give me any feel about of what to, not let's say do, but be responsive to, what to cultivate. Yeah.
Seems like maybe that's why this is the same thing.
That's what I think.
In the end, maybe things like all various things thinking is like really the only way to have any content to that plane.
Good.
It's not going to be done.
That's exactly what I think. That when you can really cultivate things, you can find them, you can produce occasions when they're more likely to think. This is the Borgman view that I like, that you nurture the focal practices wherever you find them. And there it seems to me Borgman gives you a lot more sense of something to do. So let me go on. You just went right ahead of where I am. The next sentence is, okay, now how about late Heidegger? How does he differ from this middle Heidegger? Well, to begin with, middle Heidegger has already done something that I haven't spelled out, so I will. The whole point is he's moved this from an ontic to an ontological question. That is, he's not talking about recovering the content of the culture anymore, or the former gods, or anything like that, or the former meaningful differences. He's talking about getting in touch with being a discloser. That's an ontological story. Now, you can go back and see for a minute what I said about being in time being on the track, but not quite right. The being in time seems to me, and this is the first time I've thought of it this way, and I might be wrong, sort of got one foot in the get back the content, because what you retrieve is some hero from the past, or some practices from the past, which you then bring into the present. That now sounds to me too ontic. I don't think that's what Heidegger thinks you should be doing. Anyway, I mean, there's everything right now has already got this ontological dimension. When you're a preserver, you're not preserving some hero from the past or some practice from the past. You're preserving what's going on right now as a sending of being, or now we're going to get thinking of thinking. So I think the point is, my slogan for this is recover lost modes of being a discloser, which is different than recovering anything specific that was once important and now not appreciated, or was once important and is now marginal, or was always marginal. That doesn't seem to be quite the way he's doing it anymore. And one way you can see that is when you cultivate things thinking. That's very different than making a reciprocal rejoinder to some hero in our history, or some marginal practice, some particular marginal practice, like, I don't know, being you could take Florence Nightingale as your heroine, and then you could try in a modern way to do what she was doing. There's nothing wrong with that, but it just sounds too ontic. It doesn't seem to be on the right level for Heidegger. What you need to do is to pay attention to practices right now, and people right now, too, I suppose you could say, around which are formed temporary local worlds with their own equipment, their own identities, their own mattering, and their own moods. So you can cultivate focal practices like the culture of the table, which Babette's feast is an example. You can, in general, and this is what I've already talked about, so now I'm just connecting up. Learn to be attuned to different worlds that draw you in and have authority for you. It could be the world of Aphrodite, with Marilyn Monroe as the current or the recent goddess of that. But it could be domestic worlds, business worlds, war worlds, and worlds in which you fight ferociously, they can each draw us in and have authority over us and determine for a while what it makes sense to do and give us these local meaningful differences. That would be enough to get rid of what did I already talk about what I call laid-back nihilism? I think I did once mention it. I mean, there's going to be a whole lot of different worlds. We're stuck in pluralism. That's why this total picture doesn't grab us anymore. But there's two ways to be pluralist. One is to say, well, there are all sorts of different ways of doing things, and if everybody should do it their own way, and I'm not going to interfere with their either religious life or secular life or kinky life or very hard-working for the good of humanity life, whatever. There are all kinds of ways of doing things, but once you see that, you've got to be careful. It doesn't mean that you just feel that, but of course none of them would be worth giving your life for, because it's just like a kind of smorgasbord of possible ways of life. They're all fine, and none of them would be worthy of an infinitely life and death commitment. But if you can get back into this attunement kind of world, which is a world in which you could give your life for the erotic, or you could give your life for business, or you could give your life in a war. I mean, the life is an extreme way to put it, but what I want to say is you don't have a sort of laid-back attitude toward, I just happen to pick this way of life, and I'm going to do it for a while, but if this way of life gets boring, or if this way of life gets too hard, then I'll pick some other way of life. If you're in the attuning business, then you can't do it that way, because there are things that will grab you and have authority for you while you're in that mood, while that thing is gathering you, or that world is gathering. So now just the final thing. So that gets us the possibility of new gods and even a new God, the way Heidegger thinks about it. We can't get back the old ones, but the arrival of new gods depends on whether we, and this is too voluntaristic, I'll say it first one way and then another, whether we make attuning central in our practice. We really have to say the arrival of new gods depends on whether attuning again becomes central in our practice. Because Heidegger calls the gods the attuning ones, meaning that they show up in like Marilyn Monroe as a goddess, in a world as the sort of paradigm case of whatever it is that's grabbing you. And you can't bring about that change in the practices, but you can be receptive and you can nurture attuning practices as much as you can. Now, if you do that, then you'll, well, what do I got here? Well, I put it in a funny order, but I know what I'm trying to say. Okay, there is attuning going on. There is gathering, there is appropriation going on, and you can cultivate getting in tune with it. Once you do that, it's possible, Heidegger thinks, that some new God will come along which will unify everything. He's always got, you make a place, a home for the gods, that's all you can help do. And you can't do anything about whether a God, not even a preserving sort of thing. You just have to be receptive and see if a God comes and lands in this landing field you've prepared for it. Then the new God could come along and reconfigure a new understanding of being. But the important thing, the way I see it, is you will be saved just by the humble things. Whether a new God comes along or not, once you cultivate an attuning world in which there is gathering and things being brought out into their own, you already have a life worth living, and you are already out of technicity. So now you can see how there's nothing been lost like innocence that happened once and doesn't happen anymore and can never happen again. That whole way of thinking about it, whether you're feeling bad about it or glad about it, is just the wrong way to think about it. Heidegger avoids the pessimism of Weber and the happy active nihilism of Nietzsche. He wants us to let being, well, finally, to put it in the most Heideggerianly megalomaniac way, there is hope that being is beginning to help us get back into the attuning world. And what's the hope? the existence of Heidegger. That being is operating through Heidegger. Heidegger is channeling being, and that's a sign that things are turning around. And after 2,000 years of downhill, look at this. A thinker who finally has got on to what's really important. And that would get us back in touch with the enchantment that's really going on. Heidegger calls it mystery, but we haven't lost the enchantment. It's been there all along. And I was going to end with Heidegger's little prayer for us, that it's at the end of the turning. Heidegger, who's sort of ahead of us, a prophet, it prays for us in the last paragraph of the turning, and sort of summarizes, in my view, all the things that are going on and have always been going on as long as there have been human beings with worlds, and that we've been out of touch with. He's praying for us, hoping for us, that we will listen to him and get back in touch with it. May whirl in its whirling be the nearest of all nearing that nears, as it brings the truth of being near to man's essence, and so gives man to belong to the appropriation that is bringing into its own. Okay, that's my summary.